Hi class, welcome to part 3 of our lecture on the nervous system. Today we're going to talk about the 3 parts of the brain we briefly reviewed in the last lecture. First we're going to start talking about the cerebrum. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. If we look at a cross section, look at the brain through the middle, this largest, more convoluted, meaning it's folded, this is the largest part of your brain. And it's responsible for memory. It's the main part. That your memory, all your thought processes, controls your ultimate motor responses, all your thinking, all your willful actions is controlled here. Now this has 2 hemispheres. What we're looking at here is half of the brain. And if we cut it in half, there's a right and a left. The right side of the brain controls the left side of your body. Left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. And I'll tell you more about why that is in just a minute. If we look here in the book on page 130, gives you a little bit of an overview of functions that are controlled by each half of the brain. The left is more responsible for scientific and mathematical abilities. The right is more artistic-based and tradition. That doesn't mean if you're right-handed, you'll only be able to do science and math, or if you're left-handed, you'll necessarily be good at art, which my students can attest to because I'm a lefty and I'm not good at art. Okay, so moving right along, in between the 2 hemispheres, this area right here is what connects them together. It's how they talk to each other. It's called the corpus callosum, and that's a communication system of nerve fibers to allow the 2 parts of the brain to talk. Now the cortex, which is not really shown on this model, but it's a very thin layer. It's the outer layer. It's the part where most of our highest level of thinking occurs. Now, if we move on, we're going to talk about the next part of the brain called the cerebellum. It's right below the cerebrum. And you can remember it because if you look at the cross-section, it kind of looks like a bell. The cerebellum is responsible for your voluntary activity. When you want to control your own muscles, if I want to punch somebody, it's always change, kick somebody, run, whatever I want to do, the cerebellum is responsible for those activities. Now, when we say that it relieves the cerebrum from having to consciously think, let me give you a good example of that. If you've ever tried to teach a child to tie their shoes, you'll know how difficult that task is. It does not seem difficult to us now because you've been doing it for almost 18 years. But that's a learned behavior. When you're learning a behavior like tying your shoes, riding a bike, walking, that's all controlled here by the cerebrum. But once the behavior is learned and becomes more like second nature to you, where you don't have to really think about it to do it, the cerebellum takes over. So it frees up the cerebrum to be able to do other types of work. Okay, and the last part of the brain is called the brain stem. We're looking at it like this. It actually looks like a stem. It's going to connect the brain to the actual spinal cord. The lower part is the medulla oblongata. Okay, this is going to control major body functions like breathing, heartbeat. These are involuntary mechanisms. Now, this part of the brain is where the nerve fibers actually crisscross. That's why it is said that the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body and vice versa. The pons of the midbrain is more of the middle portion. and that's linking the cerebellum and the cerebrum together. And the midbrain, the upper portion, responsible for eye functions. Okay, there's also a system called the limbic system, which is not shown on that model, but it is in our book on page 134. Okay. The limbic system is kind of like a triage center, if you know what that means. It is the system in the brain that routes things. Okay, it decides what part of the brain all these signals need to go to. So the thalamus is going to detect senses. Touch, sight, hearing, taste, all those types of senses are going to go into the thalamus, and the thalamus is going to determine which section of the brain those need to go to be interpreted. The hypothalamus is more involved in controlling homeostasis. Remember, homeostasis means your body is always striving to maintain an equilibrium. So this is going to produce hormones. For example, if you have too much glucose in your body, the pancreas is going to release insulin to lower the level of glucose in your body. The hypothalamus controls that. The hypothalamus controls your adrenal glands that will release adrenaline when you get scared. So all those endocrine system functions are controlled by the hypothalamus. Okay, that's all we're going to cover today, class. In the next lecture, we're going to start talking about the peripheral nervous system.